Hello and welcome to the Made for TV Movie Club podcast, now playing our YouTube channel. As you know, or I hope you know, and if you haven't checked us out yet, we are the Made for TV Movie Club podcast. On our audio podcast, we watch TV movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we talk about them. On this channel, we are all about current. What's new, what's happening, what's going on in TV, what's going on in movies, and I am Beth. I am glad that you are joining me today. I am talking about You Had to Be There, how the Toronto Godspell ignited the comedy revolution, spread love in overalls, and created a community that changed the world in a Canadian kind of way. So, for those of you who've watched any of my past reviews of movies, you know that I live in the Milwaukee area and I love all things Oriental theater. The Oriental Theater is down on Farwell on the east side of Milwaukee and has been there and in constant usage since 1935. It is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous theater. If you come into town to visit and you get a chance to go see a movie there, they do a lot of indie movies. They also do some current movies, mostly indies. They still do Rocky Horror Picture Show once a month, I believe. And there is just a lot going on. Popcorn, soda, wine, beer. It's all pretty cheap. And it's just a really great time. So these last 2 weeks have been the Milwaukee Film Festival. Typically, I go to several movies during the Milwaukee Film Festival. This year, I was only able to go to 3 movies. And there were several that I wanted to go, but it's just been a very busy season for me. And the first movie that I saw, I had every intention of writing a review and talking about it on this channel, but I just wasn't able to because I just felt like I don't think I could be fair to the film because there was a lot about the film that I really didn't care for, and therefore, I just feel like at this point, it's better to not talk about something at all if you don't have anything nice to say. And having said that, as somebody who is a professor and who has been a film reviewer, critiquer, I now write about old TV movies, in Twisted Pulp magazine. So for those of you who have picked that up as well, you know that I am very fair to the movies that I watch. And in this particular case, I just didn't feel like I was able to, unfortunately. However, this one is incredible. I really had such a good time. But before I talk about it, I also want to say that the last movie I'm going to see is going to be on the final night of the Milwaukee Film Festival. I've got tickets to see Power Ballad starring Paul Rudd and Nick Jonas. That actually starts in theaters on, I believe it was May 28th or 29th. It is already set to be a theatrical release, but it is doing the film festival round. So it is in this film festival. I'm super excited about that one. I have really, really high hopes. So I hope you will come back and watch my review of that before you go see the movie yourself. So having said all that, let's talk about You Had to Be There. So let's start way back in 1972, probably actually even before that. Stephen Stephen Schwartz and John Michael Talbot wrote a musical called Godspell, and it had been playing in New York City and also on the West End in London, and they decided to bring the musical to the Royal Alexandra Theatre in Toronto in 1972. There's a lot of backstory to how this film made it up to Toronto and what was happening in the theater scene and the film industry at the time in Toronto. But what they decided to do was hold open auditions for Godspell. I also want to mention that Stephen Schwartz also wrote the music for both Pippin and Wicked, so you are probably very familiar with his work, even if you don't remember or recognize his name. So open auditions were held, and the first cast, they did make some cast changes after a year, and there were some other initial changes, but the first casting was essentially Eugene Levy, Martin Short, Gilda Radner, Victor Garber, Paul Webb, Jane Eastwood, Andrea Martin, Avril Chown, and Jerry Salzberg. Oh, I'm sorry, also Velda Avex. Most of them were unknown at the time, not everybody, but Eugene Levy, Martin Short, Gilda Radner really had no other paid work before this. I think Martin Short said he did a credit card commercial. So they were all really unknown talent at the time. Victor Garber had been actually doing a tour and singing Godspell, so he was the most seasoned with that show in particular. I believe Andrea Martin was also. She didn't initially get picked, but was actually, um, brought in after somebody had to drop out of the show. So, this is really a series of interviews with most of the cast. Obviously, Gilda Radner was not able to be interviewed, and neither was Gary Salzberg. He has passed away, so he was not involved. So everybody else in the cast was given some time to be interviewed and talked about their time on the show. And the way they interwove that was so interesting because they kind of clumped it into like, this is when we started, this is what was going on during the filming, this is what happened after the filming, this is how we all became famous because again, none of them were known at all. They were all unknown actors. And then the ones who ended up moving to New York City after the run ended, I believe the show ran for 13 months. Some of the cast left, like, Steve pardon me, Martin Short. I always wanna say Steve Martin with Martin Short because, I did see their live show a couple years ago, which was phenomenal. It was such an interesting evening to watch Martin Short and Steve Martin, as it were, get along and sing and talk about their careers and talk about their friendship. And I don't know if you've watched Only Murders in the Building. It is really my favorite TV show. So I just loved that. And I loved seeing them. I also had the great fortune of seeing Eugene Levy when Schitt's Creek between the fifth and sixth season, when they knew it had already completed filming and they knew the show was not going to be renewed. However, I'm not sure if it was a full tour, but I saw the cast in Milwaukee between those 2 seasons, and Eugene Levy was there with his son Dan and a lot of the cast, Catherine O'Hara, of course, and it was just a really lovely, lovely evening to be able to see all of them together and talk about the show. And for me, that sort of rides on the back of what I think is so important about a film like You Had to Be There, and that is to keep the oral history alive because there is no film. Nobody was able to record. I shouldn't say, I don't know if they weren't able to record or they didn't record any of the show during the time that it was in production, like when it was live. There is a very small amount of recorded rehearsal, and that's all we have. And I know today they don't allow that because of copyright laws and all and those kinds of things, but it interests me that they didn't film it because Steven Schwartz, who was a big part of this interview, talked about the show, talked about the history. He was involved in the production, so I'm not sure if it was copyright or maybe they just didn't think that it was going to be anything more than it is because remember in 1972, we didn't even have VCRs. Filming anything probably was somewhat of a production and that kind of thing. So I find that very interesting and I think it's sad, but I think it's great that most of the cast, 8 of the cast, original cast members are alive and we're able to talk about this. There is actually a reunion scene at the end, which is so lovely and heartwarming and a really beautiful way to end this film. And that is important to me, and that is partly why we have the podcast because there aren't a lot of TV movies that are still talked about today, handfuls of them at best. And so to keep an oral history alive of things that don't exist anymore, in my opinion, is really important. And I think that's one of the things about this film that I think is so beautiful and touching, and that it's really important that we keep talking about these things or and to learn about them because I have heard of Godspell. I love the music. I actually have it on my phone and I listen to it, but I've actually never seen a production of it. There just hasn't been one around anywhere near where I live. So I think that I'm going to probably try and stream the film, which Victor Garber actually was tapped to play the role of Jesus in, and so he actually left the production after I think he said 3 months. I also want to mention that Paul Schaefer is in this film because it also launched his career, but much more accidentally than the other actors that were in the show. He was ended up becoming the musical director for that particular show, and then, of course, moved to New York City and became very famous in his own way, but that wasn't his intention. He actually, you know what? I'm not gonna spoil it. You have to watch it for yourselves, to see sort of what transpired to get him to become the musical director for the show, and then how it launched his career in New York City. Another thing I really loved was the animation, and for those of you who have watched 70s animation or even 80s animation, you will fully love this the way they animated it, 'cause has such a 70s feel to it, and it's colorful, and the way that they move and the way that they have things animated just is a very specific, and I don't even know how to describe it because I don't really understand animation, so I don't know how to say, "Oh, well, in 1970 it was really different than it is today," because it is, but it's almost something you have to see. It's not just the colors, it's the way they sort of created the characters almost in a I don't even know how to describe it in a two-dimensional way, but if you see the movie or the documentary, you will fully understand what I'm talking about. One of the things I didn't love about this film was that there was a lot of filler with interviews that by very famous people who I think are very interesting and I love. For instance, SNL cast members Heidi Gardner and James Austin Johnson. Uh, and Lin-Manuel Miranda also did an interview, but he wasn't on for very much of it. Janine Garofalo and Mike Myers, and I didn't really think that that added to this film because there was just snippets of them, and I thought that that was a little bit it took away from what I really wanted to hear, and that was the people that they interviewed, and, of course, they talked a lot about Gilda Radner, and, she passed away, so she wasn't and there's a lot of pictures of her, and that's really fun, and there's some footage of her as well, but like I said, there's really no footage from the actual show itself, so most of it is just archival footage from other things that she's done. And the other thing that I thought was a little bit confusing was how nonlinear that the storytelling was, which I think can be really effective, and it was for the most part, but it was also a little bit confusing, and I found myself sometimes wondering, "Oh, wait, if that happened here, then it happened there." And that's what I mean when I say that the show ran for 13 months because there is a comedian actor named Dave Thomas who also was in the show. After the first year, Martin Short left, Gilda Radner left, a couple other people left. Victor Garber was also gone by this time. Eugene Levy took over as Jesus, and then Dave Thomas came in to be a cast member in the show, and he made a joke about, the show going under after 3 months because of him or something like that. So while they didn't actually say it was 13 months, like, sort of math would have one sort of presume, if you will, that that was it, but they never outright said, and so to me, some of that was a little bit confusing, so I wish they would have bumped out the interviews of the people that weren't in the show and kept the core actors in the show. But what they do give is this beautiful, delightful story, and if you at all love storytelling, especially I just love to hear Martin Short tell stories because I think he's such an interesting person on top of being talented and funny. And Eugene Levy too, because when you think about the body of work that the 2 of them have had, it's just phenomenal. They also, I should mention, were best friends, and that is how they ended up both trying out for the show, and I think it was just luck that they both got the show, I think. So, it was just really, really a nice documentary, and I think that if you get a chance to watch it this one, I don't know if there's going to be a theatrical release, and I don't know where it will be streaming. I was not able to find that information out, but if you do get a chance, I highly, highly recommend it, and I also highly recommend that you listen to us on our podcast, the Made for TV Movie Club podcast, and I hope to see you in the clubhouse.